Hi guys, this is section 18, Economic Policy and the Euro, and the European Central Bank. Um, Small quiz afterwards, so try and pay attention, okay? All right, so the Euro is the bread and butter now, really, of the European Union. It's probably the raison d'etre as to why the whole thing was brought together in the 1990s. I know it began in the 1950s with the Treaty of Rome and everything, but I'm saying that right from the start, it was economic issues, I think, that brought many of the countries in. Many are there for political reasons as well, but I think this one remains the biggest. Now, it's had a lot of false starts, and we've already mentioned that one of the impetus for the euro was, of course, the devaluation of the dollar during the Vietnam War in the 1970s. But it was deemed currency differences were too big in the eurozone to really facilitate the single market project. They really couldn't have that single market when you were having to exchange currencies and buy other currencies, and the fluctuations between the currencies was too great to really have any forward going momentum in big national projects. And it had been a problem since the 1950s. And like I said, the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement, where the United States moved foreign held dollars off the gold standard, made the situation worse. Devalued dollars, euro dollars held by European institutions. And it really pushed France into thinking that there had to be some other European wide currency to prevent the dollar dependency. Currency unit was the first one was attempted in 1979, which was called the European Currency Unit, ECU, which can mean a funny thing in French, but never mind. And it wasn't a real currency. It was used to trade between the countries in order to avoid large currency fluctuations. And I think really it's gonna need my presence in the class to explain that one. And yeah, I will need to be there to discuss narrow bands there, and that was what the purpose was. And I just don't think I can do that with a PowerPoint over here. So there we are. There's Jacques Delors. He's the Commission President in 1989. He was the person that proposed the single currency, and no surprise, it does come from the French. The Germans were quite reticent about single currency because they were very proud of the Deutschmark and the work they'd done to stabilize that currency. So what he wanted to do, first of all, was to move the European currencies together by restricting the amount that they fluctuated between one another on the European exchange rate mechanism. So they put the currencies into what's called a managed float. Again, I'm going to have to be in class to show you that. And they then began to fix the rate between what the currencies were worth. So one French franc would be worth X Deutschmark, X pounds, and vice versa. And the fluctuation between those would be managed very carefully. And then at a certain point, they would begin to issue the single currency at that rate. In 1992, the Maastricht Treaty sets the criteria for the issuance of the euro. And in order to be a member of the Eurozone and use the euro as a currency, your budget deficit must be less than 3% of your gross domestic product. Your public debt must be less than 60% of your gross domestic product. And consumer inflation must be within 1.5% of the lowest of the three lowest inflation rates in the Eurozone. So say if the third highest inflation rate is 4, you can be no higher than 4.5. Again, I will explain the two about the national budget deficit and the public debt. You have to have a record of keeping rates within the European exchange rate mechanism for 2 years. That's the managed float. So they decided to call it the euro, and it was going to be introduced in 3 stages. And they were going to determine which stages were ready. It was difficult. They initially said we're going to have a single European currency, and it's all going to go through. In 1996, they had the Maastricht Treaty that in 1992 there was the Maastricht Treaty, and it was all going to be worked out. But I think just saying it wasn't enough, and so they had to meet again in Madrid in 1995. And the purpose of that meeting was to really get into the details of how you were expected to have this happen. It was incredibly complicated, and I think it's probably the biggest success story of the European Union, personally. Um, in 1998, they began to see which countries were ready for membership of the European Union, and that is where the fudge began because the Eurozone wanted to be bigger than perhaps it really should have been, and some countries had their currencies foregone and were replaced with the euro that perhaps weren't ready to be in the Eurozone yet. In January 1999, participating currencies were fixed to a specific exchange rate to the euro. So by the time of January 1999, you were getting bank statements and prices and everything within your country as X drachmas if you're in Greece and X euros, and it would be fixed at that. If you were paid, 4,000 drachmas a month, it would be 1,200 euros a month, and you would see that on your wages and everything would be there. You wouldn't be handling the new currency yet. In January 2002, coins and notes were issued, and dual currency stayed in circulation for 2 months. They were thinking there would be dual currency for longer. I distinctly remember it, and then it was out. They took the dual currency away, and it's been there ever since. It's been remarkable. Okay, so who are these people? One, you would recognize the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, surely. Which one would be the former chairman of the Federal Reserve here? It's Jerome Powell on the left. Mario Draghi is on the right as the head of the European Central Bank. Now, what you should know is that these two people are incredibly powerful and have probably as much power as the heads of state of the United States and China at any respective time in many ways. But they stay largely hidden in the shadows. It's very Machiavelli would approve of their behavior. So they're the chairs of the Fed and the ECB. What they do has perhaps more influence than anything else. So what has the euro brought to the European Union? It's brought a great deal of stability. Upon launch, the currency was launched at $1 on parity with the US dollar. During the height of the Second Gulf War and then the currency destabilization of the US dollar in the 2008 housing crisis, you saw the euro strengthen to the point where it was pretty much negative, really, to about now where it's still about 1.1, 1.2 to the US dollar. It doesn't really mean that much. It is very convenient for travelers. It used to be really, really awkward having to change currencies between each European country in a very small space. Psychological benefits are the same currency really does make you believe that you are in the same kind of country. And it does create a greater price transparency when you can see the price of vehicles, rents, services of all sorts of products across the European Union in one price. It does give you an idea of price transparency and is better for consumer choice. Naturally, without having to exchange currencies, there is fewer bureaucratic barriers, and it creates a very it creates a second currency to the US dollar in terms of options and provides a great deal of economic power to the European Union. Now, there are negatives. Of course, it's sovereignty. When you give up control of your national currency, you are giving up sovereignty. The European Union can call it pooled sovereignty or shared sovereignty, but there is absolutely no way you're not going to give up sovereignty if you give up the right to produce your own currency. Policy independence. In order to go your own way with financial policy, again, it's not possible if you have signed up for the euro. There was the big problem of fudging the numbers for convergence. That means allowing allowing Italy and particularly Greece into the Eurozone was perhaps fudged in order to get them in, and it caused problems later on. The idea that it would eradicate pockets of huge inequality because of the use of the same currency hasn't. In fact, it's highlighted, I think, the wealth and inequality that you might see in some regions. The deficit rules were pursued too aggressively. Some countries might need to pursue a deficit that was beyond 60% of public debt or 3% of GDP. and others didn't. And after 2003, the rules for this were relaxed. But saying some countries might have needed to do that is true, but the ones that decided to take advantage of those relaxed rules should not have taken advantage of those relaxed rules. And again, it might have been a mistake. And that definitely goes to Greece and Spain, Greece and Italy, a little bit Spain and Ireland. And like I said, the 2007-8 banking crisis was particularly hard felt in the Eurozone, despite the fact that they didn't engage in the use of exposed financial instruments that were part of the financial crisis in itself, although European institutions bought many of those instruments. The Germans, like I said, were honked off by that because they felt that the crisis was one of Anglo-Saxon exuberance. It was British and American financial institutions that had made these wild bets on derivatives and bets on and against the housing market. And they had really the ones that collapsed the global financial system in 2008. But to be fair, German institutions bought those debts. They didn't create them, but they still bought those credit instruments once they were created by British and American banks. Of course, the Greek crisis really hurt the euro as well, and it demanded that more be done with central powers to prop up these states. And it might be ultimately something that brings the European Union more closer together, because this idea that they've now really got to prop up failing European states makes them feel like they are maybe a supranational or a super state as opposed to a confederacy, or it might be the wedge to drive them apart. Greece was not the only Euro country to have this problem. We would refer to it as the PIGS: Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain, or the PEGs: Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. Okay, let's have a quick look at the quiz, and you should be able to see the quiz as this. Identify the precursor to the euro. I think we discussed that. It's certainly not these. It could be that. The Maastricht Treaty set all the following criteria for the euro except, well, you know for a fact that not all countries of the EU have to be in it. And what was the purpose of the 1996/95 conference with the Madrid conference? It was to really nail down some of the more bigger details that they just sort of like scooped over in the 1992 Maastricht. The ECB, we didn't really do this. Is it more answerable to political institutions than the Fed? And I'm going to say you don't see Mario Draghi or other members of the European Central Bank being dragged into any of the European Union legislative bodies to give testimony or to talk about things, whereas you certainly do with the ECB. So I'm going to say you certainly don't see that with the ECB. The ECB is not answerable to any of the institutions really of the European Union, or only moderately in comparison to the United States Federal Reserve. Which countries have put a strain upon Austria, upon the Euro project for the internal debt problems? All of these have, except one, and it would of course be not Germany, but the German-speaking Austria. All right, listen, I'm sorry this is so quick, and I'm going to explain more about this when I see you on Tuesday, and then we'll go on to the next one. I'll send out an email as well about those of you that want to do special projects for the group project. Okay, guys, I will see you very soon. Take care, and see you Tuesday.